Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy that you are here with us today. We have both ASU's Career Services and Maricopa's Career Services with us, Maricopa Community College's Career Services with us. So if any of you students don't go to ASU, we do have those resources for you to still ask questions and figure out links and different resources for you. So I will let them take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Acacia. Really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to welcome you all today to the Resume and Cover Letter Workshop. Today, we'll be covering some best practices around crafting your resume and cover letter, or what we call crafting your application materials. All right. So we are going to first start with how you're going to prepare your application materials. So that is your resume, your cover letter, thinking about how you can create a plan and organize your materials as you're searching for different jobs and internship opportunities. We'll touch upon a couple of different challenges that you might encounter in the job process, some effective strategies that you can use in your search, and then finally, we'll cover some resources and tools that you can use to help you as you continue to grow and build your resume and different resources. So first, we're going to talk about lots of different factors and pieces of the application process. So before we get started, I do want to introduce myself. My name is Nyasha Stone Shepherd, and I am one of our assistant directors here at ASU for Career Services. So I work with all student populations, specifically the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but anybody as they think about career readiness and all of the different pieces that play a role and factor into that. So when we think of elements of an application, there are a couple of different things that we want to consider. So applications vary by industry. If you're applying to jobs, your application will usually include a resume, a cover letter, the need of references. If you're applying to graduate school, your application may require not only a resume and references, but also a transcript and a writing sample. And so when we think about all of these different elements of an application, the resume really is highlighting your education, your experiences, and your qualifications. And your cover letter is really focusing on the elaboration of your most relevant experience and how relevant your experience is to this specific posting. So what I like to say is a resume is the facts. It's the pure facts of your experience, your qualifications, all the different things. And then your cover letter is the place to brag. Your cover letter is the place to showcase why you are the best fit for the role, why your values align with whatever that position may be, and also being able to showcase a little bit of your personality. Like I mentioned, if you're applying to graduate school, you might need a transcript, you might need to write a personal statement, but today we're really going to focus on that resume and cover letter. So how should you prepare your application? So when we're thinking about applying to any type of role, we're first thinking about these different factors and how you are going to best prepare for those using these. So the first thing is reviewing the position description fully. So when you're considering your experiences and your goals, you're thinking really about how do they align with what the employer is seeking? What does the company exactly want you to do? And so after you kind of review the position, narrow it down and identify the things that they are really looking for, you're going to want to tailor your application materials to every single opportunity that you are going to be applying for. When you look at the description, you're going to think about the keywords and the phrases and the context that the employer is really looking to have. And then you're going to implement that organization's language into your language as you think about the resume and the cover letter that you're going to be specifically submitting. And then the last thing is really make sure that you're following all of the instructions. All applications are slightly different. There might be a time in which you are applying to many, many different roles, And it's really hard to keep track of everything. I'll give you all a resource later today about how to keep track of things so that you're making sure that you're submitting the correct materials. It would be the worst thing to be one of your dream jobs or dream applications, and you forget to you upload the wrong resume or you upload the wrong cover letter, and you're automatically kicking yourself out of that application. And so we mention that because it happens too often than not. And so just make sure to take that extra second to take a look at what you're submitting to make sure that you're submitting the best things. So when we think about wanting to take the time to read the job description, there's a couple of different main things that you want to keep in mind. This is one of the most crucial pieces of your search because it's important to understand what you're applying to and also understanding the different skills or abilities that the company is looking for. And so you're going to want to pay attention to the overall description of the role, make sure that you're learning about the company's values, make sure that you're understanding the purpose of the position and where that plays a role in the industry that you're looking for, and really thinking about the understanding between the requirements and the preferences of a role. And so requirements are just that. These are things that you have to be qualified for the opportunity. These are the minimum that you must have to even be considered. And then there's the desired qualifications, skills, or preferences. And these are items that are going to make you a stronger candidate, but not necessarily required. And so it's okay if you don't have all of the different things. When you look at some of the data, one of the things that they say is as long as you have all of the required expectations of the role and about 50% of the preferences of a role, you're identified as a strong candidate. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the interview. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be chosen, but that means you have a higher likelihood of those things being taken into consideration. And so here's just an example of a job description in terms of what they're looking for. Must be pursuing. So again, language that is that requiredness. Minimum of a 3.0 preferred. So again, if you know, hey, I've got a 3.3, great. But if you've got a 3.1, you're not there yet. And that's something that they are having as a minimum. So that means that that's a requirement. And then you see the desired skills. So maybe you don't have a ton of demonstrated leadership experiences, but you have some, but you can't necessarily identify those. That's okay, because maybe you can really identify those strong analytical skills that you hold. And so making sure, taking the time to look at the job descriptions, highlighting really the skills that you have and the things that you want to make sure to keep in mind as you're going through the process. So as we think about job descriptions and making sure that you are a right fit for the role, and this is really what you're going to want to be applying to, something we also want you to consider outside of your skills and experiences is also the fact that employers are looking for applicants that are career ready. And what career ready means is that you have all of these 8 career competencies and that you can identify an experience, you can talk about something that you can translate your academic, your co-curricular experiences, your entrepreneurship experience, or the different skills that you have to align with the competencies, and also using the language that employers will understand. And you do this really by learning as much as possible about the industry. You're going to learn common best practices, making sure that you're up to date on the lingo and terminology that is specifically used for the industry that you're interested in. Use the skills that are required or expected. So like we mentioned before, there are expectations and there are requirements, and there's things that are maybe expected or preferred. And so what are some of the experiences that you have? What are some things that you might need to gain? But then also thinking about what other professionals in the industry that you're interested in going into, what they have. And so as we talked about reading through that job posting and identifying the things that, again, are required, you also want to read through that job posting to identify and determine What's really important to you? And what do you need to develop? And what is the most important to be successful in that career? So maybe you feel really strongly about the fact that you have experience with teamwork, that you are a strong leader, but maybe you know that your written skills, written communication skills are not as strong as they need to be. Maybe you struggle with professionalism depending on the professional setting, and so you know you need to work on that. Having a really clear picture about being able to know where your strengths lie and what you need to work on is really one of the first steps as you think about applying to any kind of opportunity. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we continue to go through the presentation. And so now we're going to get really started in the nitty-gritty. Please feel free also to ask any questions in the chat or raise your hand on Zoom, and we'll make sure to answer those for you as well. So the first most common application material is going to be your resume. Now, we know this says resumes and CVs, but today we're going to focus on why we need a resume and why it's the most important thing. So a resume is the most commonly used application material in the United States, okay? It is a condensed document that summarizes your professional information. You're most likely going to want to keep your resume to one page. Its general recommendation is what we like to say is that one page for every 10 years. And so most of you probably don't have 10 years of experience, so one page is perfectly fine. And it is really a really concise summary of information with an emphasis on experience and skills. So you typically always have an opportunity to further highlight the experiences that you've had, like I mentioned, in your cover letter and during an interview. And so one thing also is thinking about the different sections of a resume that we'll run through. And so sections are based on relevance to the opportunity. And so that is going to be your education, that's going to be your professional experience, that might be your volunteer work, that might mean the leadership opportunities that you've taken part in. Now, a CV is a course of life. And so it is something that is usually more than one page. It's usually also something that is used internationally or for academia reasons. And there's lots of different additional sections that you would add to a CV versus a resume. So for example, if you had presented at a conference, you might not necessarily put that on your resume, but you would put that on your CV. If you have research experience or medical experience, fellowships, you've done some research or along for grants, again, things that you may or may not put on your resume depending on the space that you have and the relevance to what that might be, okay? But at the end of the day, what I always like to say is that your CV and your resume is really the first impression to the hiring committee. So regardless of the document that you need, all of them should be simple and easy to read. They should be professional and error-free, so making sure that there are no grammar or spelling mistakes in their documents. This section should be kept in reverse chronological order, meaning that your most recent information is listed at the top. And then lastly, always make sure that you are representing your qualifications to best that they can be, okay? So when we think about some formatting things, this is just high level, and then we'll go into some details. Format is really important whenever you're submitting your documents. And so you're going to want to make sure that everything is really clean and visually appealing. And the one thing that we always suggest is not to use templates. And now I know that some of you might have a templated resume right now, and that's totally fine. But what we always tell students is there's a couple of different reasons why we encourage you not to use templates. Is one, it doesn't stand out to the employer. It can be seen as a shortcut. Two, depending on the applicant tracking system, which we'll talk about a little bit later, sometimes it doesn't format correctly when you're submitting the document. And because many employers are now using resume reading AI and different software, that is going to see your resume most likely before an actual person sees your resume. And so you want to make sure that your whatever you're submitting is compatible with the software that that company may be using. And really the only way to ensure that is not by using a template, because the template may or may not be recognized by those systems. So that's something important to keep in mind. Making sure that your resume is black and white, single spaced, half margins, 1-inch margins. You're going to want to eliminate as much white space as possible. And then the opposite goes, if you have the more and more experience you have, you can adjust your margins to make sure that you're leveraging as much space on that sheet, on that one page that you're actually going to be submitting. You're going to want to make sure that the font of your resume is simple. And so making sure that it is either Arial or Times Roman numeral, anything that's some of those basics. And then your name should be really the highlight of your resume, the thing that's right at the top that they can easily see. So 14 to 16, and then the rest of your resume should be 10 to 12. Again, all of these things are changeable and adjustable. These are just standard kind of best practices. But as I mentioned, the more and more experience you continue to get, you might need to make your name a little bit smaller so that you can fit some of the other experience that you have. Okay? All right. So these are really the main required sections when we think about a resume. So you're always going to want to make sure to include your contact information, your education, and then your experience. And so, as I stated earlier, we really want you to avoid using a template also because it's hard to edit. Like, you're going to have more and more internships, you're going to have tons of different opportunities. And as you continue to gain those, the template can't grow with you. And so by using a blank document and starting with a blank document or a Word document or a Google Doc, that allows you to continue to grow and your resume to grow with the experience that you have. And so we know that sometimes that can be overwhelming because you're staring at kind of a blank page to get started, but it's most helpful when you have all of the information at hand. And I'm assuming all of you are coming today with some kind of a resume. And so you want to make sure to think about just how you can move all of that information over to, again, a document that can continue to grow with you. Something that we also encourage you always to do is also to regularly update your resume, because opportunities can arise unexpectedly. You never know when an opportunity might become available. And so making sure that you are, what I always like to say is of staying ready, so you don't have to get ready when something comes along. Someone might say, hey, this is an opportunity that I think that you might be a good fit for. Can you send me a copy of your resume? And maybe you haven't updated in a year and you've had 4 or 5 internships, or you have a volunteer experience that you haven't added, or you had a leadership position in a student organization or something like that, and you haven't had the opportunity to add it. Then you're going to be scrambling to kind of get all of those things ready. And so I always encourage students to every semester, kind of at the end after you're done with finals, spend a couple of hours and just update your resume. Just update with all of the accomplishments that you've been able to have. And something also I always like to say is when you're submitting, you keep for yourself can be longer than 1 page. So if you're like, well, my resume is, 4 pages, great. That's wonderful. Not all of the experience that you have is going to be relevant to every single application or to everything that you're going to be submitting. So make sure to tailor it, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So when we think about these required sections, we're going to go into the different ways that you can format your contact information on your resume, okay? So your name, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be the largest thing. You're going to want to make sure to include your first and last name, your phone number that has an appropriate voicemail box, an appropriate or professional email address. If you're an ASU student, encourage you to use your ASU email address. That's a great way to, or have one that's a great thing to use if you already have it. Or even at the Maricopas, you can use your Maricopa email address for that. You can also include your LinkedIn profile. Something that we encourage people not to put nowadays is your street address. Back in the day, they used to send you physical mail. So you needed to have your physical address listed on your resume. Nowadays, you don't need to do that. And so your LinkedIn profile is another place that you can, another thing that you can add to your contact information. Another good reason why to put your LinkedIn profile is it also tells you a larger story of who you are as an individual. And so, like we mentioned, a resume that you're submitting might only be one page, but your LinkedIn is infinite. And so all of the things that are listed on your LinkedIn, an employer can take a look at and really see the entirety of all of your experience that you have. These are just a couple of different format options for you. And so you, of course, want to use as little lines as possible. But if you don't have as much experience, the last format option here is a great way to showcase or to fill some space on your resume so that you can make sure to get it to that full one page. Okay. What I always like to tell students is this bottom format is kind of when you're first getting started and you're starting to explore and you don't have that much experience, then you're probably going to move to this top one, the more experience that you get to kind of narrow it down. And then as you continue to grow with your experience, your format for your contact information is probably going to look like this second one because it's the least amount of lines. So this is 4 lines, this is 3 lines, this is 2 lines. So it's the least amount of lines for you to be able to use. See some things in the chat. I don't know if these are getting questions. Okay. Moving on. So as we think about the second required section, the second required section is you're going to include is your education. Okay. So it's necessary to include your degree. And something to keep in mind is that we don't want to use abbreviations. And so do not abbreviate BA or BS, type out Bachelor's of Science or Art, and then consider bolding the name of your program. Always list your degree before any minors or certificates or school that you might have. And the reason why we have this is because of the fact that your degree is usually the most important qualifier when you're submitting an application. And so most of the time, again, employers, internship opportunities, they are looking to say, is this student in a specific academic program? Do they have the specific GPA requirement that I'm looking for? Are they graduating at a certain time? Because maybe that opportunity is looking for recent grads or people who are going to be graduating in maybe December. So adding that information is going to be important. And so after listing your major, you're then going to list your school name. And so Bachelor of degree name. So bachelor's of, let's say, business. Okay. Minor in nonprofit administration at Arizona State University. Maybe you made the dean's list in 2022, and then you can add any other honors or affiliations that you might have. Okay. Best practice as it relates to your GPA is 2 things. Is if your GPA is not above a 3.0, don't put it. Most of the time, employers are looking for a 3.0 or above. And so if you don't have that, just choose not to include it, and that's okay. And then it relates to when you're graduating, just put the month and the year in which your expected graduation may be. Okay. any questions on how you format either your education section or how you are going to format your contact information?
There are a couple of questions in the chat if you want to
Wonderful.
check them.
Thanks, Bailey. Let me pull those up. Okay. If I could get a general sense of where I should be starting. Okay, this is the first one I see.
Oh, I would say I can maybe try to step in. I was starting to type and I'm so glad that we're asking it because it's probably better than me typing everything. But I think I'm understanding if I'm understanding the first question correctly, I think somebody's asking if they have like a personal website where they could add this in their resume without it being overwhelming. I personally think it could be in a few different places. I've seen personally sometimes it being listed under the contact information if there's adequate space there. I've also seen it trickled in a cover letter, sometimes after their name, it'll be in a signature space as well. But I've also seen if students have created academic projects or included like an academic project section in a resume, and they, break it down, they'll also link it there to then direct employers to see kind of what they've done. So I think it could be, personally from my own experience in a few different places, I think it just depends on what kind of website it is and what it's showcasing. I don't know if you have any other perspective for that one.
Yeah. And one, I would love for you to introduce yourself, Izell,
Oh,
just
yes,
in case
I'm
anybody
sorry.
on the call doesn't know who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Izell Silva, and I am the Director of Career Services over at Glendale Community College, but I'm here kind of representing Career Services at Maricopa today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So same, those are some of the suggestions that we have as well as we think about where to put a website. I would say that especially if you feel that your website is a really good exemplar of all of the experience that you have, and maybe you're not as present on LinkedIn, you're not using that maybe as much, just instead of putting your LinkedIn profile, put your website profile, and that's okay. And that works great. So, okay, thank you. All right. I'm going to try to answer the next question. So I'm from robotics, and okay, that's the website question. Thank you. Is it better to include Dean's List like titles acquired during school in the education section, or does it look better in the achievement section? I'm going to say that it is probably a better fit in the education section because, again, your Dean's List is really aligned with what you've done in the classroom and what your academics may be. So you can list it there. Again, website of your work. We've already answered that question. Do we need to add relevant coursework in our education section if you haven't completed your degree yet? So as it relates to relevant coursework, there are a couple of different ways that you can list it. I always like to say, if you're just going to list the fact that maybe you took a C++ course, and you're not going to add any information about the project, the success of the project, what you did, what you included, what was the impact, and you probably shouldn't list it on your resume. It's something that maybe you can add to your cover letter. It's something that you should keep in mind as you are interviewing for something to be able to add and showcase the fact that you maybe have that relevant experience specifically for that. But it probably isn't going to fit in your education section. I'll talk a little bit about it later, but employers will look at your resume for a very short amount of time. And so you're really going to want to put the highlights at the top. The things are going to be the most important for someone to see. And so again, the qualifier of that you're getting a degree is important. The type of degree that you're getting is important. But if the coursework isn't directly aligned with specifically what that employer is looking for, then you can add that in a different section that we'll talk about a little bit later as it relates to that. Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I always tell students, remember, if you do decide to use a relevant coursework section, it's not a space where you list all the classes you've taken. You really need to be cognizant of what is it that you're applying for, what classes have you taken that you think you've learned something or you've done something that would contribute to the work that you would be doing in whether it's a job or internship that you're applying for. So you want to be very strategic about what it is that you're adding in a relevant coursework. And if you do decide to add it, you need to make sure you're putting the title of the course versus, the acronym of the course and the number, because that's academic language. Like we would know what it is at our institution or another institution, but employers would have no idea what that means. So if you've done, a course on robotic engineering or whatever, right? Don't put ECE or whatever the acronym is with the number, put the actual title of the course.
Thank you. That is very important as well. Does adding courses done in school on LinkedIn at all help with your profile in terms of what employers see? Not necessarily. Again, it's all about, like Isel mentioned, the strategicness. If you took, let's say, a COM 100 class, that's great that you took that class. You've learned a lot of different things. I'm sure you've got I was a comm major, so I'm like, yes, you learned lots of different things. You learned kind of the basics and the foundation, but that's just kind of standard. Lots of students are going to take that. And so how does that really help set you apart? Now, if you took let's say a very specific research-based communication class that's all about interpersonal communication, and you got to work with 3 different cities across the valley and help them implement a communication strategy and a communication plan, well, that's a pretty big project. And so that's maybe a course and the detail of the course that you can add to be able to really highlight, again, a specific skill that you gained. But if it's just a course that you took because it's a requirement, that's great. That's wonderful, but it's all about how you're highlighting your skills and how you're highlighting, again, what's setting you apart as an individual. That helps. All right, I think we answered all the questions. So I am going to keep going. And again, please, thank you for all of the questions that you all ask, and please continue to throw them in the chat. And I'll try to be more cognizant of stopping at each section as well, so to make sure that you all can, we're answering the questions as appropriately. So the third section of your resume is where you're going to list your experiences. And so when listing and explaining any experience, it's best to format how it's listed on this slide. So your position title. So this is going to be the title of the name of the title listed first. So let's say, again, I am an assistant director, the name of the organization. And so organization is Arizona State University, and location, Tempe, Arizona. You're always going to include the month and the year that align with the dates in which you are going to have that role, or in which you have that role. And then the last thing is you're going to, most important, list all of your accomplishment statements. And so your accomplishment statements are going to be a description of the duties and responsibilities and all of the accomplishment that you held when working in that role. You're going to add these by, of course, having different bullet points. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you can best do that after we talk about what else you can include on your resume. So each one of you is unique in all of your experiences. And so there might be times which you're going to add additional sections that may highlight the different qualifications that you might have for a specific opportunity that you're going to be applying for. So here are a couple of different things that you all could add depending on the experience. So I know that we answered lots of questions as it relates to relevant coursework. So again, if it's very specific, if it's strategic, if it's going to really highlight something that is going to be a benefit to the employers, add that. If you have different community involvement, so your community service, you are in a student organization and you've held a leadership role, again, you've had an internship opportunity or multiple internship opportunities. again, if specific course projects or research or a thesis that you may have done really highlight specific skills that make you more qualified and make you stand out, make sure to add those. Any technical skills that you might have, and then lastly, any certifications or licensures or things that you could add to your additional sections. So saw a note pop up, so I'm going to answer this question of, do you recommend including scholarships acquired in school on their resume? It really just depends. I always like to tell students, if you got, let's say at ASU, we have the New American University Scholarship, you just kind of automatically get it because of your education, your GPA, your test scores. It's wonderful that you received the award, but what have you done specifically, again, that highlights why you would be adding that to your resume. If it's something just to list, because you're like, hey, don't have a ton of volunteer experience, I don't have a lot of job experience, I don't have a lot of internship experience, great, add the fact that you got that scholarship, but don't just list the scholarship. List maybe what the requirements of that scholarship was, how you got that scholarship, how the experience that you had is, there's a reason why you're adding it. But those are things, scholarships and volunteer experience. What I always like to tell individuals is it can be something that you have on your resume for a short amount of time, and you maybe plug and play. So maybe let's say a job opportunity is really looking for someone who is really involved in their community. You're going to want to put all of your community involvement work in there. You're going to want to put all of the ways that you've been able to help and engage and grow and all of those things. But let's say that you don't see any mention of the importance of community involvement or community engagement or service, but they really want to make sure that you have a specific, you can manage lots of different things at one time. To me, scholarships, that usually means that you are, again, involved, you've got a good GPA, you've got some decent experience or a life story that's really great. You're going to want to highlight that scholarship that you received and why you received it more than your community involvement, because that organization places a higher value on that scholarship versus the community involvement. Does that clarify things for you? Iselle, anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna jokingly say we say it depends a lot because it really does depend a lot on the position you are wanting to apply for. So I often find myself in presentations when people ask questions, I'm like, well, it depends on the job. So you might hear us say that a lot because it really boils down to that and prioritizing what it is that you want to highlight versus not. Because as was mentioned, right, your resume isn't everything that you've ever done. It's basically us highlighting what's most valuable and important to the employer that we are submitting our application materials to.
That was super helpful. Thank you so much. I had a quick question just about the session.
Great.
Is there like a quick one-on-one with everybody after, or is this more so like a workshop?
This is more of a workshop, but we have an hour and a half. And so we've got plenty of time as I continue to roll through. I'm about halfway done here. And so there'll be plenty of time for continued questions. And then depending on if you are an ASU student or a Maricopa student, we'll provide you with some additional resources in which you can connect to have that one-on-one support. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now we're going to dig pretty deep into accomplishment statements. So regardless of what else you include on your resume, formatting your experience is really important. And we suggest that you format your experience as accomplishment statements, because accomplishment statements communicate what you've accomplished, the skills that you've developed, the outcome of any project or task that you are responsible for. And it's not just a list of a task that you did. So formatting an accomplishment statement should really be formatted in this way: an action verb, a subject line that explains the project or the task that you did, and then the result or outcome. So what I always like to tell people is it is what you did, your action verb, how you did it or what you were doing. So again, a description of that project, and then what was the result. So what you did, how you did it, and what was the result. And then if possible and where possible, we really encourage you to use numbers to quantify the outcome. And I'll show you an example of the reason as to why we ask that. So on this side, we have listed potential job experience that you might have or someone might have that does not use accomplishment statements. So it's a great start. You know, it lists the tasks, to figure out what to include. But this doesn't really stand out. So if you're in a pool of similar candidate that has similar skills, a lot of people may have ordered supplies, but it doesn't really tell you much of a story. It doesn't tell you really what the impact of what you did was. And so someone who maybe took orders in a slow, quiet setting has a different experience than someone who took orders in a fast-paced, busy setting. So I am going to see, because the next slide is all of these statements listed as accomplishment statements. But I always like to see if anybody would like to take a try at adjusting one of these tasks into an accomplishment statement before I show you a couple of examples of how you can do that. Does any bold person feel confident in making one of these tasks an accomplishment statement? I'll give it a couple seconds, and if no one decides to, that's okay too. Okay. I see this question in the chat, and I will talk about that in a moment. So I won't forget to answer that question around education or work gaps, okay? But I want to make sure that we get through all the accomplishment statements things. So here is an example of the same things, quote unquote, but written as an accomplishment statement. So instead of took orders, this person is now saying, I communicated with up to 300 customers during a 4-hour period in a fast-paced environment with successful delivery. Okay, doesn't that sound a little bit better than just took orders? Can I get thumbs up, maybe, from all of you? Like, it is giving you more information. It's telling a story. It's telling an employer that not only did you communicate, you had to communicate effectively because you successfully delivered over up to 300 customers or orders during a 4-hour period. You're saying, hey, not only you didn't just order supplies, you resolved inventory issues and ordered supplies to maintain stock level. And what does that mean? That also means that you made sure that there was quality service. If you run out of cups, or you run out of sugar, or you run out of stirrers, that could be a problem for your business. And so you made sure that there wasn't any inventory issues, that all of the supplies were ordered on time. And so all of these things are important to think about, and adding a little bit more context and a little bit more information. You'll see that each one of these starts with an action verb, okay? If you're currently in the position, you're going to want to make sure to use present tense. Communicate, resolve. When you think about things that are past tense, so what you previously did, so as you see, this individual left that role in July of 2022, they are talking about how they developed customer loyalty, not that they're currently developing it, but they did that during that role. Then, of course, that core of what you did, you resolved inventory issues, you problem solved and negotiated, you, loyal customer base by cultivating strong relationships. Those are the things that you did that you really want to highlight. And then the last thing is finishing with the result. So as you see on these examples, it's successful delivery, quality service, negotiate customer service issues that you were able to negotiate through and problem solve. Those were the outcomes. An increase in sales. Those are the things that an employer is going to be looking at and saying, oh, wow, that's really great. Not only can they take orders effectively and communicate effectively, but that also means that they can they're building relationships. And because they're building relationships, they're helping us with the sales in our office. And that's great. And all of those things are important. A couple of reminders about accomplishment statements is they're not things that are copy and pasted from a job description. You need to add more. You need to add really what you did and the result of what you did. Quantify wherever possible. So again, developed a loyal customer base by cultivating strong relationships. Technically, you could close the statement there, but by adding the contribution to a 12% increase in sales, you're showing them the perceived impact that you could possibly make with the company that you're applying to. And that's what they're looking for, is what can you do and what impact will you help us make if you are going to be if we offer you the position. And then lastly is showcase your career competencies and utilize keywords and phrases that are in the job description. And so I didn't mention it a lot, but the biggest thing is when we think about the applicant tracking system is the fact that they are also looking for keywords. And so if a job description says that they are looking for someone who can effectively communicate, and every single job or experience that you have, how can you showcase that you were able to effectively communicate? Because that's clearly important to the employer. Okay. See a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to pull that up. Okay. All right. So when we think about, I want to answer the question about education or work gaps that you have in your career. And how do you put it out aesthetically? That was the question. And so, and thank you for answering the question as it relates to the accomplishment statements. I'm sorry I didn't see that. But when we think about any gaps, it depends on a couple of different things. Like Isel said, it depends is something we use all the time. If it is an education gap, it's really not a big deal. So let's say you graduated high school in 2020, and you took time off to work until now. And so or last year, so 2023, you're going to put that you are currently in your program in 2023. You don't need to put that you graduated high school in 2020 because that's no longer important information to put once you're actually in an institution of higher education at the Maricopas or at a four-year institution. Okay. As it relates to any work gaps that you might have, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach it. And Isel, please feel free to add any suggestions that you have for this as well. But depending on how large the gap is, it's something that you can put on your resume, or it's something that you can share in your cover letter. You can say, I had this experience, I worked in this role during the time that I wasn't working a formal job. I did volunteer work, or I was a caretaker, or I, did these specific things that are still going to help me be a good candidate for this role and take on this opportunity. Now, those things might not necessarily be something you're going to list on your resume, depending on if it was, again, if you were a caregiver or something else, the reason why you had that gap. But there's ways to explain that gap in a cover letter. Now, let's say, again, you weren't formally working, but you were doing lots of volunteer work. You were really engaged in community. You were really taking advantage of other opportunities, even though it wasn't formal work, quote unquote, that you were getting paid for. That's okay. They don't know if you were paid for an opportunity or not. They're looking at the skills and qualifications that you have. And so if you still gained those skills and qualifications outside of a formal role that you were getting paid for it, you can still add that, and that's okay. And the last thing I'll say is there are lots of times, especially nowadays, that people understand that there are gaps. And so it's usually not that large of a deal unless you also don't have the qualifications for the role that they're applying to. And it's mainly because of that gap that you've held. So it really just depends. If we have time at the end, I'll give you a suggestion as it relates to being able to find out specifically by industry if it's going to be a larger concern or not. So, Isel, anything else to add on that at all?
No, I think those are all really good. I think at the end of the day, just being prepared to address it in case an employer does ask, but just a reminder that you don't have to disclose tons of personal information. I know sometimes when people explain it to me, they go into lots of detail, but it's figuring out how do we word it in a way where we are being honest, but we're not having to disclose a whole bunch of personal information. So that's something that you want to think about and practice in case you do need to address it. I've also seen some individuals use kind of like a combinational resume as well, where they'll throw in a skill section towards the top to highlight transferable skills and highlight that just to kind of de-emphasize dates a little bit because that'll go before an employment history section. So again, it just depends on the person's background, what you've done, how long the gap is, if you've done anything between the gaps. But there are a lot of different ways that it could be addressed. At the end of the day, it's really what do you feel most comfortable with and confident and that you would be able to speak to.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip past the next few slides in terms of let's practice and just really quickly go over the hot zone. So as I mentioned earlier, recruiters don't spend a ton of time looking at your resume. They usually spend about 10 to 20 seconds. And so what's important is that you are highlighting the most important things that someone would want to take a look at and the most valuable information right at the top of your resume. Okay. Now, this is not to say like, oh, I'm going to spend all of this time editing my resume and making it like the best it can be, and they're only going to look at it for 10 seconds. No, that's their initial first glance. They're going to look at it and say, does this person have the skills and qualifications that I am looking for? Yes, great. Let me take a little bit more time to do a deep dive into all of their experience that they have. But if an employer can't very clearly see that you are qualified for the role, that you have the very specific skills that they're looking for, chances are if they have to go through 500 applications, they may or may not be able to take that extra minute or 5 minutes to review all of your experience. And so make sure to highlight as much as you can the things that are going to be at the top of your resume. Okay. So when we think about the applicant tracking system, and I've mentioned it a few times today, the applicant tracking system is the software that employers use to find the most qualified applicants or candidates for the position. So like I mentioned, if there's a role and there's 500 applications, the applicant tracking system helps an employer say, of the 500 applicants, 200 of them meet the minimum requirements. Okay. So it streamlines the process, reviewing applications, and just removes the resumes that don't meet the requirements set by an employer. ATS systems also scan, looking for keywords specifically used in the job description. So as we mentioned, the accomplishment statements, those action verbs, how can you look at the action verbs that are used in the job description and copy those onto your resume? Of course, we want them to be true still, but you can use those words and say, hey, I very clearly have the skills that you're looking for because you said that you were looking with someone with cross-functional collaboration skills, and I'm showing you that I have cross-functional collaboration skills in the student organization that I am the president of. And so it just makes it really clear in terms of that. Any questions about the applicant tracking system and how to kind of navigate through? There's really not a way to navigate through it other than make sure that you're taking the time to edit a resume for every single position that you are applying for, so that you can make yourself the most qualified, and hopefully make it past the applicant tracking system to the point where the recruiter is actually taking a look at your resume. Okay. Technical skills that we might not have, but it's required. So this is where the requirement versus preferred comes into place. And so if there's a technical skill that a role is looking for, that's a requirement. So let's say a project management role, the role requires a project management certification by the Project Management Institute. If you don't have that, then there's probably a good chance that you're not going to be qualified for that role. And so it's either how do you get that technical skill that an employer is looking for so that you can be qualified for that type of role. But let's say they say preferred project management certification, but it's not a requirement, they just prefer it. Then if you don't have it, then that's okay. But if this is really where it comes the importance of applying to opportunities that you have the qualifications for. Because again, if it's a required skill, if it's a required thing that they're looking for and you don't have it, then you need to be able, you have to find a way to get it so that you can be qualified for that opportunity. Okay. All right. So a couple of things in terms of best practices. So making sure that you're applying to jobs that match your qualifications, making sure that you're using relevant keywords from the job description to better showcase that you are qualified for the role. So again, if the word communicate is in the posting, you should utilize the word communicate in your resume. You're going to want to include a skills section. Again, if you, for a couple of different reasons, like Azel said, let's say you do have a gap or you really want to highlight a specific skill on your resume, you can include a skills section. There, especially when it comes to technical skills in terms of the need. I will make a little bit of a caveat in terms of that. It's more important that you show that you can execute those skills, especially if they're a skill that is more of a core skill, like communicate or critical thinking, or working with others, things like that. Because if you just list it, I have these skills, great. How? How do you have those skills? If I can look at the list of skills, but I can't clearly see in the resume that you can execute those skills effectively, that's not going to be as important to me. Yes, you need to provide evidence. You got to prove that you have those skills. So it's kind of what do we like to say? It depends on if it's something that's necessary to add. Make sure to keep your resume simple, no templates, and then making sure that you're submitting the right type of documents. And so that is going to be, again, if it's a PDF or a Word doc, whatever that might need to be, use basic language. avoid any color graphics, and then making sure to keep track of correct punctuation. I know that says avoid color graphics and punctuation. Appropriate punctuation should still be used, but nothing that is going to confuse the ATS system. These are things that you're going to want to make sure to keep in mind. Okay. We are going to be moving on to cover letters. So I want to take a few moments because we're out about the hour mark right now to see what questions, if any more lingering questions you all have around cover letter, around resumes. I always say a PDF. So the question is doc or PDF, what would you suggest? I always say a PDF because again, it's you can very clearly like not have to edit a format. It's a PDF is a PDF. People can't mess that up. So it's better to submit it that way. And then that way your Word document that you're working on is something that's continuing to ebb and flow and change as you get more and more experience. And you know what you're submitting is the PDF for that specific role. So that's also a good, if you're a visual person, I'm a visual person, that's a good visualization to say, did I upload a document or did I upload a PDF? Okay, it's a PDF. That's probably the one that I'm going to be.
And just a suggestion, if once you are saving a PDF from your doc, I find it really helpful rather than first name, last name, updated resume, resume 1, resume 2. I see that a lot. Put an identifier so that way you can identify what resume you use for the job you're applying for. So sometimes putting the name of the company or name of the position. Haha, true. I know, I see it all the time. Students, I just had one today. They had like resume 1, 2, 3. So always, first initial, last name, and then a name of the position or an abbreviation of the company. That makes it super helpful. So hopefully you get a call back. And if you're trying to look for the resume you submitted for that one, it makes it easier on your end, even to identify what you use for an application you submitted.
That's a great tip. Thank you.
I had a question about the skills section.
Okay.
So when you add skills, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, but do you recommend adding like a position associated with it? How does how do you organize it?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways that you can organize your skills. So you can have a specific skills section in which you can list out the skills that you have, whether that's a technical skill or one of the core competencies that I mentioned earlier. So you can just list them out. Like we've talked about in terms of like accomplishment statements and things that don't have like isn't telling a story. Just by listing the skill, it isn't really saying a lot. Again, if it's C++ or SQL or things like that, that's a little bit different versus I'm an effective communicator. If you can't prove or show that you've been able to be an effective communicator, then just listing that you're an effective communicator isn't telling me a whole lot. So let's say you're like, I'm an effective communicator and maybe I did that in an organization that I was in a year ago, but I'm, no longer in that organization. And so I don't want to put, I'm not going to list anything about that. Then you can add kind of a one-liner underneath that specific skill to say, here's an example of how I was able to get that skill. Same thing as how can you leverage a cover letter? Can you put in your cover letter very clear examples of all of the skills that maybe you listed on your resume and how you're proving that you have that skill. The more and more experience as you continue to get over time, the more and more a skill section is a very give and take of deciding if the employer is going to see value in a skills section or more value in your accomplishment statements and how proving that you are able to execute all of the skills that you have, if that makes sense. So again, it kind of just depends, but those are a couple of different ways in which you can do it.
Thank you. That's super helpful. So, just to like sum it up, when it comes to technical skills, like I want to be a life scientist. And that includes a lot of like lab skills and stuff.
Mhm.
So that comes under technical skills, correct? I don't really have to explain it, I
It,
guess.
again, it
It
depends.
depends.
It
Okay,
depends.
gotcha.
It depends on the company. It depends on the role that you're applying for. It really just depends. So I don't feel comfortable saying like, no, just put the skill. It, you know, if I'm going to make the decision or make the recommendation between a skill and an accomplishment statement, I am always going to tell you an accomplishment statement because it paints a picture. It tells a story of what you are able to accomplish and what you are able to accomplish effectively and how that can impact a company. And at the end of the day, no matter what industry you're going into, that's what someone wants to see is that you're going to you're going to come into my organization and positively make an impact on anything that you do because I can see that you positively made an impact in these other ways at other places or in other things. And so, yes. Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I was just going to add to that, sometimes rather than just listing, if you decide to do an accomplishment statement, which I think is always great, think about, was it through a specific class? Was it through a project? Can I add an academic project section and then create accomplishment statements that are including those skill words that I want to kind of incorporate or interweave, right? Or do you want to include a lab experience section? And you can write bullets that way, where again, rather than listing just a whole bunch of things on a resume, you're creating accomplishment statements where you're using those keywords that you want to include or identify anyways, but you're using them in a more meaningful and impactful way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Isel. Right. So we are going to move on to cover letters. So when we think about cover letters, this is really the formal letter that goes along with a resume. And its purpose is really to elaborate on the information in the resume. So unlike a resume, a cover letter allows you to introduce yourself. It allows you to provide a little bit more context to your achievements or qualifications. Again, your motivations for joining the company. I mentioned earlier, but I'll just reiterate, the cover letter is a place where you can showcase who you are as a person. You can add a little bit more personality. You can talk about why you really care about the company's values and how your values align and that you're excited. You wouldn't necessarily put excited in your resume, but you can add that language to your cover letter. You should write your cover letter in business letter format. The same header that you're using for your resume, use it for your cover letter. So again, your name, contact information, LinkedIn, website information, that's what you should have. And it should really be formatted in terms of the introduction and then about 3 paragraphs or so that highlight your qualifications, the reason why you're applying to the role, and why you're a good fit for the role. Okay. So as we think about the 4 paragraphs maximum, it's, introduction, who you are, why your skills and qualifications play a role. Paragraph 2, you're applying to the role because you really like the company's values, you care about the same things, you see yourself growing or being able to, make an addition to the company in this way. And 3rd paragraph, hey, this is why I'm a good fit. I've got qualifications and skills in this. I've had the opportunity to do this and I can help your organization scale and things like that. And in most cases, your cover letter is going to be 1 page or less. Okay. But take advantage of it. This QR code here provides you with a couple of examples of cover letters that you can use. So please feel free to scan that. I will also say you all will get not only a copy of this presentation, you'll get a copy of the slide deck as well. So you'll be able to go back and scan this if you're interested. So in the opening paragraph, you're going to greet the hiring manager. So it should be something that is very clear of the fact that you are applying to a specific role and job that you are applying to. So you're going to also talk about details that excite you about the role and excite you about the program, and focus on the employer as much as possible. So again, it's not all necessarily all about like, oh, I have this skill. Great, I have this skill and this is what I can bring to your organization. I have this.
What?
Sorry, Anna, thank you. I am excited because I, really value the fact that you care about innovation, or you really care about giving back to community. So talk about why you're a good fit for the position, why you're a good fit for the organization, and then highlighting the top assets and what makes you a strong candidate, and give as many examples as you can within a paragraph, right? Being able to talk about the fact that you have led organizations through a challenging time, or developed a new tool or resource or process for whatever in your experience. And so again, you're showcasing the multiple ways. It's not necessarily meant to be a duplication of what's on your resume, but it is meant to be able to give additional context that you might not have been able to put on your resume for that. And then the last thing is really ending your letter with a brief summary of everything regarding your qualifications and the fact that you're a good fit, and then a call to action. So I'm really excited, to looking forward to talking to you. I, look forward to being considered for this role. I, things like that, just being able to highlight. Acacia, you're off mute. Is there a question?
Oh, no, sorry. I think that
No,
was
no problem. Just wanted to make sure that you were good.
I do have something, I don't know if this might be a whole separate workshop, but if either of you have suggestions for AI.
I can talk about a little bit about it because there are ways that you can leverage AI in both your resume and cover letter writing. Couple different things. AI is a place to start. It is not something that you type in and prompt AI and then copy and paste that and save it and submit that. AI is only as valuable as the information that you put into it. So for example, similar to the accomplishment statements, let's say you're like, hey, write a list of, tell AI, write a list of experience that I gained while being a barista. It's probably just going to list a couple of tasks for you, right? But if you're like, hey, I am a junior studying biology, looking to apply to a role in a research lab, my experience as a barista, please help me adjust my accomplishment statements to fit the skills and experiences in this specific role. So you're going to add some more context. You're going to add some additional detail so that it can give you more information, the best information that you can have. Another thing I'll say is AI does not like to be wrong. AI will lie. So for example, if you say, here's a job description, write me a resume, it'll write you a resume. But 99% of the time, that's not based on your experience that you have. You haven't actually worked at those companies. You actually haven't had those experiences. And so you have to be really specific about what you're asking it to do to be able to help you. So let's say, for example, you want to use AI for your cover letter. You can say, again, I am a junior studying biology, applying to this research role at this company. Here's the job description. Please generate a cover letter based on the job description and my work experience. And so you can put in your resume and it will come out with a cover letter. Again, you're not going to want to just copy and paste that and say, hey, I'm good to go. You're going to want to make sure to read through that. You're going to want to make sure that it's the voice of you and you're not just, again, using the voice of whatever it is. In addition, you're also going to want to be very considerate of what you're putting into AI. You are not going to want to put your name and institution and contact information and any of those things into AI, because AI is always learning. And whatever you put into AI is what it is using to learn. And so your LinkedIn profile, your contact information, all of those things, you're going to want to make it submit details, but not give it too much information that it doesn't necessarily need. That's not as important for using it as it relates to it. So we know that right now students and people, not just students, people are using AI a lot to generate a cover letter, to edit a cover letter, to write a resume for them. And then as a hiring manager, I will also say ATS, so the applicant tracking system, can tell, and recruiters can tell. And so even let's say your resume makes it past the applicant tracking system, I can very clearly look at a resume and say, ooh, this person didn't actually write that resume. And I'm not going to take the extra 10 seconds to see whether or not more of that information is correct or accurate or written in a way that I think is the voice of an individual. I'm automatically just going to no longer consider that person. And so it's a great starting point, but it is not the end all be all. And it's not something that you really should just be using to copy and paste from. There's lots of great resources that are out there specifically around AI and using it and leveraging it for applications. If you are an ASU student this fall, so in about a month or so now, we will have some resources listed on our website that how you can best leverage AI to help you for your application materials. We're still working on them right now, getting them all together. And most of the resources that we have on our ASU website, probably about 90% of them, are not behind an ASU login. So you can still get to it even without being an ASU student. So I hope that answers your question, Akeisha. I see there's lots of things in the chat. So
it was me trying to get them the document.
Okay.
But there is a question. I don't know if you want to answer it or Bailey, but they want to know, how do you recognize that it's AI?
For me, a lot of the time it's the language. You are probably not using very flowery language in your day-to-day. And AI is pulling from everything. And so if it has specific words that to me that are, again, just very clearly not used in a day-to-day regular basis, and it's not just traditional professional language, but it's like overly formal, it's an automatic no, because it's automatically a very clear sign that this wasn't written by you. Again, because there is a difference between being professional and being overly formal that AI tends to be when it's prompted to write something for a cover letter or a resume. One additional thing I will say on that as well is also your resume and your cover letter are the starting points to getting a role. So sure, you could get an interview by a resume and a cover letter, but if you can't show up in the interview because you don't actually have that experience, or you can't talk about that experience, or I look at your resume and your cover letter, and then when you're in the interview, again, clearly isn't the same voice, again, that's automatically going to kick you out of an opportunity. And so that's why it's so important not to just not to rely on AI to create these things, but use it as a support. So just as you would ask your friends and family to review a paper or a application because you've stared at it for, a couple of days and you need a different set of eyes on it, AI can be another set of eyes, but it shouldn't be the one writing it. Any other questions? And I apologize for the QR code and Google Doc being good. Izell, anything that you have to add on the AI conversation?
No, I mean, yes to everything you said. I've worked with students, and I'm reviewing their cover letter, and we can tell when it's been AI has been used. And, just to back up what you were saying, like your resume and a cover letter is a representation of you. And so you never want to misrepresent yourself in those documents. Because even recently I reviewed a cover letter, and while reading it, I'm like, oh, this is really good. And then I keep reading it and I'm like, wait a second. Knowing the work that I was doing with the student, knowing the resume, how I assisted with them, the cover letter was advancing the level of the student's knowledge. And so we really had to scale it back. So we do know the difference, and just know that those application documents are a representation of who you are, and you never want to misrepresent yourself, because there's no worse thing than, seeing a resume and a cover letter, and then we come in and it's like, whoa, there's that misalignment happens. So you never want to be in that position where people are questioning your, authenticity or anything like that. So again, it could be a really good starting point, but it is not at all where you should end. You should go back, review, reread, add to it, so it is in your own voice.
Thank you so much, Izell. And I know that there was lots of things. Anything else that you all have questions about before we keep going here? I'm going to be considerate because we've got 6 minutes. So just when we think about closing your cover letter, again, make sure that you're requesting an opportunity, make sure that you're including your contact information, you're expressing gratitude, and things that you should avoid, making sure that you don't end the letter abruptly or being too casual, of like, let's cut to the chase. I'm so excited to, have the opportunity and things like that. This is the last opportunity really to impress the employer or admissions committee, again, if you're applying to graduate school. And so making sure to end your letter professionally, like sincerely or something similar. And if you can, it's a nice touch if you were able to physically sign your letter or insert your signature from a word processor, so that, it just adds that extra to your cover letter when you're ending it. So we're just going to do, as we think about a final review of your application material, these are some of the things that you want to make sure to keep in mind. Make sure to use a checklist. So again, if you scan this QR code, there's a checklist of things that you can consider when you're making sure to add to your resume. Like, do I have my name listed? Do I have my contact information appropriately listed? Are all of my accomplishment statements listed? There are so many tools nowadays in terms of grammar and spelling. Make sure to get those checked. That's a simple, easy check that you shouldn't really miss nowadays. Make sure that you are using the same keywords and phrases that an employer is using to really stand out. And then lastly, make sure to have someone else review. I mentioned it, but it is so easy to be in it and reviewing it over and over again on your own and miss something because it's only your eyes. And so make sure that you have someone else to review. And there's a couple of different ways at ASU that you can do that. And Azal, I'll let you explain some of the ways that you can do that at the Maricopas as well. But one of the things that we have here at ASU, and again, this is a QR code, is something called VMOC. So VMOC is a 24/7 resume feedback tool. So after you edit your initial resume and you feel like it is good to go, VMOC can kind of be your second set of eyes. It will give a caveat for VMOC. VMOC, just like we talked about AI, it's not perfect. It is a good starting point, but it might give you a score, let's say 70% because you missed a comma or you added an additional period or things like that. It is not the same as a person, but in a pinch, if you need a resume reviewed and again, because an application deadline maybe is coming up and you've got an hour and it's 11 p.m. at night and a professional staff member isn't there to be able to help you, VMOC is a great place to get started. Okay. You do, again, if you're an ASU, this is behind an ASU login. And so you have to be an ASU student to be able to access this resource. But there's some additional ways that you can connect with our team here at ASU Career Services. So you can make an appointment with one of our career advisors. And so we have a career advisor on every single campus location. Our career advisors meet virtually, in person, over the phone, Zoom, a lot of different ways. And so you can schedule an appointment with one of our career advisors to review your resume, to review your cover letter, and make sure to kind of get those last set of eyes before you're actually submitting your application. So, Izell, are there any specific resources that you would like to point Maricopa students to?
Yeah, I dropped some information. If you're a Maricopa student, we do have a career readiness essential course for students that we have 9 different modules. So obviously that includes resume, cover letters, interviewing, networking, AI and career readiness, like all of that. So I dropped the link in there. It is a self-enroll course. So you can click on the link and self-enroll. I also did drop in a link that provides information to all of the career services across the district. So depending on what campus you're located, whether it's Glendale or Paradise Valley or Phoenix College, each of us kind of have our own resources, even within our website that's accessible, right? Downloadable things, templates. I know at GCC, we have a platform called Big Interview where people can practice online and get AI feedback. So lots of information on our individual websites. So make sure that you are connecting if you would like more one-on-one assistance.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. We at ASU use Big Interview as well. It's a really great tool. So we at all of our career services, we're here to help you. No matter where you are, is your future starts here. We've got tons of resources. We've got tons of people and online things to help support you along your career readiness journey. So please make sure to utilize those and contact us as needed. This is our career services website and our contact information if you would like to do that. And then this last thing, I know that we're at time, but Acacia, if you wanted to talk about this specific slide.
Yeah, and we just want to say thank you so much to both of you for being here and talking to us about ASU Career Services and Maricopa's Career Services, because as you know, Blackstone LaunchPad is a program not just for ASU students, but both for Maricopa County community colleges as well. So we're really excited to be emerging all of this together and to be bringing resources for all of you to feel included. And we will be doing more workshops like this on career readiness, because in August, Blackstone has notified us that we will be starting to push more internships starting in August rather than later. So it's really great to see all of you here getting this resume help and guidance, because it'll be really important for you when we do start posting these opportunities for you to be ready and feel confident that your resumes and your cover letters will be able to land you those internships, and they are paid. So
Well, thank you so much, Acacia. I'm going to stop sharing. Bailey put the link to the Blackstone LaunchPad website. So as those opportunities become available, make sure to highlight that. And I hope you all have a great rest of your summer, a great rest of your very hot day if you're here in the Valley. We hope to connect with you later.
thank you.